Commander Lee Hyun-woo pressed his face against the cold metal of the viewport, watching as the alien ships came closer. His heart was beating fast, but he tried to stay calm. The human fleet looked terrible compared to what was approaching them. Their ships had patches of metal welded on top of old patches, rust stains that no amount of scrubbing could remove, and hull plating that had been repaired so many times it looked like a crazy quilt. The alien vessels were completely different. They looked like someone had grown them instead of building them. The ships were made of some kind of crystal that caught the light from nearby stars and threw it back in rainbow colors. There were no sharp edges anywhere, no visible joints or seams. They moved through space like graceful sea creatures swimming through deep water. Lee Hyun-woo had been in space for 15 years, but he had never seen anything like this. His own flagship, the Daegu, groaned and creaked as its old engines worked to keep position. Sometimes he could hear the air recyclers struggling to keep everyone breathing. The ship smelled like machine oil, hot metal, and the sweat of 300 crew members who had been working around the clock for weeks. High Admiral Velthorn's voice came through the communication system, and even through the translation device. His contempt was clear as daylight. The alien's words dripped with disgust as he spoke about human technology. Lee Hyun-woo could almost see him wrinkling his nose like he was smelling something rotten. The alien commander was speaking from his own bridge, which looked more like the inside of a palace than a warship. Everything was smooth and glowing with soft light. There were no buttons or switches that Lee Hyun-woo could see, just flowing surfaces that seemed to respond to the alien's touch. The air probably smelled like flowers there, not like the recycled atmosphere that tasted of metal and machinery. Captain Park Min-ho stood next to Lee Hyun-woo, his jaw tight with controlled anger. Min-ho was a good officer who had worked his way up from the engine rooms. He knew what it felt like to have your hands dirty with grease and to fix things with whatever tools you could find. He had been listening to the aliens laugh at their ships for over an hour, and Lee Hyun-woo could see the muscles in his neck getting tighter with each insult. The aliens kept pointing at different parts of the human ships and laughing among themselves. They used words like primitive and barbaric and pathetic. One of them asked how humans had even managed to leave their home planet with such terrible technology. Another wondered if humans were too stupid to understand real science. Lee Hyun-woo knew his ships looked bad. The human fleet was made up of vessels that had been built quickly and cheaply. Earth needed ships fast, so they built them with whatever materials they could find. Steel, aluminum, titanium, and sometimes even recycled metal from old buildings. The ships were held together with welds that were strong but ugly, bolts that were practical but not pretty, and patches that kept the air in but looked terrible. But Lee Hyun-woo also knew something the aliens did not understand. These ugly ships had traveled farther from Earth than any human had ever gone before. They had survived meteor storms, radiation fields, and the cold emptiness of deep space. Every patch and every weld told a story of survival and determination. That is to, Alien Admiral continued his lecture about superior technology. He explained how their weapons could destroy entire planets, how their shields could stop any attack, and how their engines could travel between stars faster than light without making any noise or heat. He spoke like a teacher talking to very slow children, using simple words and speaking slowly, as if humans might not understand. Lee Hyun-woo nodded politely and asked questions that made him sound impressed and maybe a little scared. He let the aliens think he was amazed by their technology, but while he was talking, his eyes were constantly moving. He was studying everything he could see about their ships, their weapons, and most importantly, their attitudes. The aliens were so confident that they did not even bother to hide their weaknesses. They bragged about how their entire civilization had moved beyond crude physical weapons. They had not used missiles or bullets or explosives for thousands of years. Their ships had no armor because their shields were supposedly perfect. They had no backup systems because their main systems never failed. As the meeting went on, Lee Hyun-woo began to smile inside, even though his face stayed serious and respectful. The peaceful meeting turned ugly very quickly. One moment the aliens were laughing at human ships, and the next moment they were making demands that made everyone's blood run cold. Captain Morketh, who seemed to be the alien military leader, stood up from what looked like a throne made of Glowing crystal. His voice became hard and commanding, like a parent scolding a disobedient child. The alien captain did not ask for Earth's surrender. He demanded it. He spoke as if humans had no choice in the matter, as if the decision had already been made by creatures far smarter than any human could ever be. His words came through the translator with absolute certainty, like he was stating a simple fact, such as water being wet or fire being hot. Commander Lee Hyun-woo felt his stomach drop. He had hoped this first meeting between humans and aliens would lead to friendship, or at least peaceful trade. Instead, it was turning into something that looked very much like the beginning of a war. He glanced at Captain Park Min-ho, who was standing so still he might have been carved from stone. Min-ho's eyes were focused on the alien ships surrounding, them probably counting weapons and calculating odds. To show how serious they were, the aliens decided to give humans a demonstration of their power. They chose the destroyer Busan, which was one of the smaller ships in the human fleet. Captain Kim Tae-min was a good officer who had served in the Earth Defense Force for 12 years. His ship was old but well-maintained, and his crew knew their jobs. None of that mattered when the alien weapon hit. There was no dramatic explosion or bright flash of light. The alien ship simply pointed one of its crystal formations at the Busan, and something invisible reached out across space. In an instant, every light on the human destroyer went dark. The ship's engines stopped humming. Its communications went silent, and it began to drift helplessly through space like a piece of floating junk. Lee Hyun-woo tried to contact Captain Kim, but there was no response. The Busan was completely dead, floating dark and silent among the stars. 300 human beings were trapped inside a metal coffin with no power, no heat, and no way to call for help. The only reason they were still alive was because the ship's emergency life support systems were designed to work without main power. The alien fleet moved into position around the human ships like wolves surrounding a flock of sheep. Their crystalline hulls caught the starlight and threw it back, in patterns that were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Lee Hyun-woo could hear a low humming sound coming through the hull of his own ship. It was the sound of enormous amounts of energy being held back, like water behind a dam that was ready to burst. Captain Morketh's voice came through the communication system again, and this time he sounded almost bored. He explained that disabling the human ship had taken less energy than his people used to heat their living spaces. He could destroy the entire human fleet without breaking a sweat, and everyone knew it. The demonstration had made his point perfectly clear, but while the aliens were showing off their power, something else was happening deep inside the human flagship. Engineer Choi Yu-jin had been working in the engine room since the moment the alien ships had appeared on their sensors. She was a small woman with quick hands and an even quicker mind, and she had been studying the alien technology with the intensity of a detective solving a murder case. Yu-jin had brought her best people with her into the depths of the ship where the aliens could not see them. They had been taking readings, analyzing energy signatures, and studying every detail of how the alien ships worked. What they discovered was very interesting and potentially very useful. The alien shields were incredibly powerful, but they used enormous amounts of energy to maintain. Yu-jin calculated that each alien ship was consuming more power every minute than some entire human cities used in a day. That kind of energy consumption meant the aliens had to have massive power sources, but it also meant they had a weakness. Even more interesting was what the shields were designed to stop. The aliens had built their defenses to handle energy weapons, plasma beams, and laser attacks. Their shields could probably stop anything that involved pure energy or exotic particles. But Yu-jin noticed something that made her smile for the first time since the aliens had arrived. The alien ships had no armor underneath their shields. They had grown so confident in their energy barriers that they had stopped building physical protection into their hulls. Their beautiful crystalline ships were probably as fragile as glass if you could get past their shields. Yu-jin sent her report to Commander Lee Hyun-woo through the ship's internal communication system. Her message was brief, but full of hope. The aliens were powerful, but they had made the same mistake that many powerful civilizations had made throughout history. They had become so dependent on their advanced technology that they had forgotten simpler ways of fighting. As the alien fleet tightened its grip around the human ships, Lee Hyun-woo began to think that maybe this fight was not over yet. Commander Lee Hyun-woo spoke the two words that would change everything. His voice was so quiet that only the officers on the bridge could hear him, but those words traveled through the communication system to every human ship in the fleet. Captain Park Min-ho smiled for the first time since the aliens had arrived. Weapons Officer Song Hae-won's fingers flew over her control panel, activating systems that had been waiting silently for this exact moment. The human ships had been floating there like sitting ducks, looking helpless and defeated, while the alien fleet surrounded them. The aliens probably thought the humans were preparing to surrender. They had no idea that the past hour of humiliation and threats had been exactly what the human commanders were hoping for. Every insult, every laugh, every dismissive comment had given the humans more time to prepare their surprise. What happened next was something the aliens would never forget, assuming any of them survived to remember it. The hull plating on the E. Human ships began to move. Sections of metal that had looked like patches and repairs suddenly slid apart with mechanical precision. The aliens had been looking at these areas and laughing about human engineering, never realizing they were actually looking at carefully disguised weapon systems. What the aliens had mistaken for crude maintenance hatches were actually armored covers protecting some of the most dangerous weapons humanity had ever built. High Admiral Velthorn was probably still smiling when the first railgun barrel emerged from the hull of the cruiser Seoul. The massive weapon was as long as a city block and as wide as a subway tunnel. It had been hidden inside the ship's structure so cleverly that even detailed scans had not revealed its presence. The aliens' sensors were designed to detect energy signatures and exotic matter, not simple mechanical devices. More weapons appeared along the hulls of every human ship. Railguns, mass drivers, missile launchers, and cannon systems that used nothing more complicated than controlled explosions to throw projectiles at incredible speeds. The human fleet transformed from a collection of helpless scrap heaps into a formation of warships that would have made any Earth admiral proud. The aliens finally understood that they had made a terrible mistake, but understanding came too late to save them. Captain Park Min-ho gave the order to fire, and the Seoul's railgun sent its first projectile screaming through space. The tungsten slug was about the size of a telephone pole, but it was moving at a speed that turned it into something far more dangerous than any conventional weapon. Physics became the human's ally, as the projectile carried kinetic energy that could crack mountains. The alien shield that intercepted the tungsten slug had been designed by some of the most advanced minds in the galaxy. It could stop laser beams. That could slice planets in half. It could deflect plasma bolts hot enough to melt steel in microseconds. It could absorb energy weapons that used principles of physics that humans had not even discovered yet. But it could not stop a big chunk of metal moving really, really fast. The tungsten slug passed through the alien shield like it was not even there. The shield had no way to grab onto something solid, no way to deflect something that was not made of energy. The projectile hit the crystalline hull of the alien ship and kept going, passing completely through the vessel and out the other side. The beautiful crystal structure that had looked so elegant and advanced cracked like an eggshell, then exploded into a million glittering pieces. High Admiral Velthorn's voice came through the communication system, but this time he did not sound confident or amused. He sounded shocked and terrified as he watched one of his most powerful ships destroyed by what he had been calling primitive human technology just minutes before. Weapons Officer Song Hae-won was watching her displays with the focused attention of a surgeon performing delicate surgery. Her screens showed dozens of targets, and she was calculating firing solutions for each one. She had spent years training for this moment, studying ballistics and trajectory mathematics that the aliens had probably forgotten centuries ago. The other human ships joined the attack, and space filled with projectiles, moving at tremendous speeds. Some were simple chunks of metal accelerated by magnetic fields. Others were explosive warheads, guided by computers that had been programmed to hunt down specific targets. A few were exotic penetrator rounds, designed to punch through the heaviest armor anyone could imagine. The aliens discovered that their advanced civilization had a critical weakness. They had become so dependent on energy-based technology that they had stopped preparing for simpler threats. Their ships had no physical armor because they had believed their shields made armor unnecessary. Their defensive systems were optimized for stopping energy attacks, not solid objects moving at relativistic speeds. The human fleet had been designed by people who understood that the universe was a dangerous place full of unexpected threats. Every human ship carried multiple backup systems, redundant life support, and armor thick enough to stop anything short of a direct nuclear hit. They were built to survive, not to look pretty. As the battle continued, it became clear that the aliens' technological superiority meant nothing when their enemies were using weapons they had no defense against. What started as a battle quickly turned into something much worse for the aliens. The human fleet was not just fighting back, they were completely destroying everything in their path. Lieutenant Colonel Nam Ji-hoon had been waiting for this moment his entire military career. His heavy cruiser Incheon was built like a floating fortress designed to take punishment and keep fighting. But today he was not worried about taking hits. Today he was focused on giving them. The Incheon's missile launchers opened like the petals of a deadly flower. Inside each launcher was a weapon that the aliens had not seen in so long they had forgotten such things existed. The missiles were not elegant or beautiful like alien technology. They were simple, brutal, and incredibly effective. Each one carried a nuclear warhead powerful enough to turn a city into glass. Nam Ji-hoon watched his targeting computer lock onto the alien ships. The enemy vessels were still trying to use their point defense systems, but those systems had been designed to stop energy beams and plasma bolts. They worked by creating energy fields that could deflect or absorb incoming attacks. But these defenses were completely useless against solid objects flying through space at tremendous speeds. The first missile launched with a roar that Nam Ji-hoon could feel through the deck plates of his ship. The nuclear-tipped projectile accelerated, away from the Incheon, its simple chemical rocket engine pushing it toward its target with unstoppable determination. The alien ship tried to shoot it down, sending streams of energy that could have melted steel, but the beams passed harmlessly around the missile without slowing it down even slightly. When the nuclear warhead detonated against the alien hull, the explosion lit up space like a newborn star. The crystalline ship that had looked so beautiful and advanced just moments before was vaporized in an instant. There was nothing left but expanding gas and radiation that would glow for days. Captain. Morketh was screaming now, his voice coming through the communication system with panic that was almost human in its intensity. The alien commander could not understand what was happening to his fleet. His ships were supposed to be invincible. Their technology was supposed to be superior to anything these primitive humans could create. But his vessels were being destroyed, one after another, by weapons that his civilization had considered obsolete for thousands of years. The captain's own flagship was taking heavy damage from weapons he could barely comprehend. Depleted uranium rounds were smashing through his ship's hull like bullets through paper. Each impact sent shockwaves through the crystalline structure, creating cracks that spread like spider webs across the elegant surfaces. The alien ship was dying, and there was nothing its advanced technology could do to save it. Commander Lee Hyun-woo stood on his bridge, watching the destruction with cold satisfaction. He felt no joy in the killing, but he felt a deep sense of justice. These aliens had come to humanity's fleet with demands and threats. They had disabled a human ship and left its crew helpless in space. They had laughed at human technology and treated Earth's representatives like ignorant children who needed to be taught their place. Now they were learning that there was wisdom in simple solutions and strength in practical engineering. The aliens had spent so much time perfecting elegant energy weapons that they had forgotten the devastating power of basic physics. A chunk of metal moving fast enough could destroy anything, no matter how advanced the target might be. Engineer Choi Yu-jin had worked miracles in the months before this encounter. She had taken the human fleet's existing weapon systems and modified them in ways that would have impressed the greatest military engineers in Earth's history. Every ship now carried mass drivers that could accelerate projectiles to significant fractions of light speed. The kinetic energy carried by these projectiles was enough to crack open asteroids or punch holes through the cores of planets. The aliens had dismissed these weapons as primitive chemical explosives, not understanding that humans had learned to harness the fundamental forces of motion and mass. When something heavy hits something else while moving very fast, the results are predictable and devastating. It did not matter how advanced the target was or how sophisticated its defenses might be. Physics always won in the end. Across the battlefield, human ships were systematically destroying alien vessels with weapons that any Earth engineer could understand and build. There were no exotic particles, no manipulation of space-time, no advanced physics that required centuries of study to comprehend. Just simple, brutal effectiveness that got the job done. The coalition fleet that had seemed so powerful and threatening was being torn apart by the kind of weapons humans had been using to fight each other for centuries. The irony was not lost on Commander Lee Hyun-woo as he watched another alien ship break apart under the impact of conventional explosives that predated human spaceflight by decades. The once mighty alien fleet was running away like scared children fleeing from a nightmare. High Admiral Velthorn's flagship, which had looked so beautiful and intimidating just an hour before, was now a broken wreck limping through space. Huge cracks ran along its crystalline hull, and entire sections of the ship were dark where the power systems had failed. The elegant curves that had once caught starlight and thrown it back in rainbow patterns were now jagged edges that leaked atmosphere and sparks. Behind the retreating aliens, space was filled with the debris of their shattered fleet. Pieces of crystal hull floated like deadly confetti, glinting in the light of distant stars. Some chunks were as big as buildings, others were tiny fragments that would drift through space for millions of years. Each piece told the story of advanced technology that had met simple physics and lost badly. Commander Lee Hyun-woo stood on his bridge watching the enemy retreat, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The human fleet had achieved something that would have seemed impossible just hours before. They had faced the most advanced military force in the known galaxy and sent it running with its tail between its legs. But the victory had come at a cost in ammunition, energy and stress that would take weeks to recover from. High Admiral Velthorn's voice came through the communication system one last time, and the proud confidence was completely gone. The alien. Commander sounded like a man whose entire worldview had just been shattered along with his ships. He kept repeating the same words over and over, as if saying them enough times would make them true. His technology was supposed to be superior. His weapons were supposed to be unstoppable. His shields were supposed to be impenetrable, but technology meant nothing if you did not understand how to use it properly. The aliens had become so focused on creating elegant solutions that they had forgotten about practical ones. They had built ships that were works of art, but forgot that warships needed to survive ugly fights. They had created weapons that were marvels of science, but ignored the fact that sometimes the best weapon was the simplest one. Commander Lee Hyun-woo's response was quiet, but firm. He had learned something important during this battle, something that would change how humans thought about their place in the galaxy. Being advanced did not necessarily mean being better. Having sophisticated technology did not guarantee victory. Sometimes the old ways worked better than the new ones, and sometimes simple solutions were more effective than complicated ones. Captain Park Min-ho was receiving reports from all the human ships in the fleet, and the news was better than anyone had dared to hope. The destroyer Busan had managed to restart its engines and was back in formation with its crew tired but unharmed. A few ships had taken minor damage from debris, but no human vessels had been destroyed. The casualty count was so low it was almost unbelievable. Meanwhile, the alien fleet had been devastated. More than half their ships were gone, turned into expanding clouds of gas and crystal fragments. The survivors were badly damaged and fleeing as fast as their crippled engines could carry them. It was the kind of one-sided victory that military historians would study for centuries. But the real victory was not just tactical, it was psychological and political. The humans had earned something that could not be taken away by superior technology or advanced science. They had earned respect through courage, clever thinking, and the willingness to fight when fighting was necessary. News of the battle spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. The galactic communication networks carried the story to thousands of worlds and billions of intelligent beings. The primitive humans from a small planet on the edge of nowhere had defeated the mighty coalition using weapons that most civilizations had abandoned long ago. It was the kind of story that would become legend. Other species that had been forced to submit to coalition dominance began to whisper among themselves. Maybe newer was not always better. Maybe there was wisdom in keeping some of the old ways alive. Maybe the coalition was not as invincible as everyone had believed. In the depths of the human flagship, engineer Choi Yu-jin was already hard at work studying pieces of alien technology that had been recovered from the battlefield. Her team was carefully examining crystal formations, energy conduits, and control systems that represented centuries of advanced development. Understanding this technology could give humanity advantages that would last for generations. At the same time, intelligence reports were coming in from across the galaxy. Alien scientists were desperately trying to figure out how human kinetic weapons worked. Civilizations that had not used physical projectiles for thousands of years were suddenly very interested in learning about railguns, mass drivers, and nuclear warheads. The galaxy had learned an important lesson that would not be forgotten anytime soon. The most dangerous weapon was not necessarily the most advanced one. Sometimes it was the weapon that your enemy had stopped preparing for. The threat they had forgotten existed, the simple solution they had dismissed as primitive. Humanity had taken its place among the stars, not through superior technology or advanced science, but through practical thinking, determination, and the willingness to use whatever tools worked best for the job at hand. Retri Claude can make mistakes.